Hello my darlings, and welcome back to my channel. We are doing something that I didn't plan to do, but it seemed like a good idea. I was scrolling on Twitter last night and I came across a tweet where someone listed their favorite Stephen King book from each decade. And although I feel like on my channel I do mention Stephen King a lot, he is one of my favorite writers, and he's definitely one of the most prolific writers that I enjoy. So it's easy to talk about him. So I figured it'd be fun to tell you guys my favorite books of his from each decade. And Stephen King started in the 70s publishing, novels and things. So, yeah. That's where we're going to start. Obviously, no one probably cares what books are my favorite, but oh no. I'm a YouTuber, so I make content, no matter how crappy it is. Fire, earth, water, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years had passed, and my brother and I discovered the new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone. But I believe Aang can save the world. I can also do the Pokemon theme song, but we're not going to sing on this channel yet. So we are going to jump right into this with the 70s, when Mr. King himself began publishing novels. And we're not going to go too far into his publishing career because we are stopping at his second book he ever published. I have glowingly reviewed this particular book. It is Salem's Lot. So I have went on about this book. If you watched my 20-something minute video of my Hail to the King review of Salem's Lot, you know that Salem's Lot is one of my favorite books that he has ever written. It is the first book Stephen King's that I read. Salem's Lot is about a town that is overrun with vampires. And being someone that does love vampires and things, I love the horror take on it as opposed to, at the time, the more paranormal, romantic take that was being taken on vampires. So, Salem's Lot will always hold a special place to me. It will always be one of my top 5 Stephen King books. It's special to me. And one of the reasons why I think that if you haven't read it, you should read it, is because it really puts together everything that King is known for and good at. It's towns and people and monsters and people that are more monster than the monster. Everything into one. And grief. King is amazing at grief, which I actually feel like is going to reflect in my list. I love the way that King describes and writes grief. I feel like it's one of the most honest things that he knows how to do. So most of my favorite books actually deal with grief. From the 80s, this was not hard to choose, but there are a lot of books that King published in the 80s that are some of my favorites. But the thing that kind of wiped all of them out is because my absolute favorite Stephen King book in the entire world, my favorite novel ever written, Pet Sematary. Stephen King wrote Pet Sematary in the 80s. I have heard that he didn't think he would ever publish this book. I am very happy that he did, because I think that Pet Sematary is the most heart-wrenching and terrifying book that King has ever written. Little story time. The first time that I read Pet Sematary, I had read a few Stephen King books before. None of them scared me, but I used to read at night. So I would just lay in bed and I'd read. And I was reading one night, and I was in the ending parts. So maybe spoiler, stop now, skip ahead a little bit. But I was at the part where Gage was with Judd. And if you know the part, then you know the part. Well, Gage is screaming, and all of a sudden, I hear the floor creaking. Now, I live in an old house, but this house does not settle. The floor does not creak. So I was afraid someone was in the house with me. Got up to look. There was nothing. So, okay, you're just freaking yourself out. So I lay back down. I'm reading this book. The house phone, my landline, with a voicemail machine on it, is beside my bed. The lights did not go out. None of the electricity flickered or anything like that. But all of a sudden, my voicemail machine just starts screaming a date and time at me. I nearly pissed myself. So, you don't have to be tough to be a horror writer, obviously. Yeah, Salem. Salem, are you embarrassed? This is your first time on camera with your cone on, isn't it? Yeah. No matter what I did, he would not stop scratching that ear, and he was making it worse. Yes, you was. But he is not a fan of this cone at all. In the decade of the 90s, the best decade to ever exist, because I was born in 1993. The best decade to ever exist also gave me, at the end of the decade, my second favorite King book ever written. Hi. Which is Bag of Bones. So, once again, Bag of Bones is not talked about a lot, honestly, and I don't understand why. When I found the book at a thrift shop, like, I'd never heard of it. I didn't know when it came out or anything like that. I just went home and read the book because it was a monster. And Bag of Bones is huge. So I went home and read the book. I cried. Like, I didn't cry with Pet Sematary. Or did I? I might have. But not like I did with Bag of Bones. Like, I bawled my eyes out with Bag of Bones a few times. And I don't understand why more people don't talk about this book. Like, I haven't heard too many people say a lot of bad things about Bag of Bones, but I also haven't heard people say that Bag of Bones is their absolute favorite book ever written. And they should, because Bag of Bones is amazing. And just a basic little summary, it is about this writer, and his wife suddenly dies of a brain aneurysm. So he ends up going back to this cabin that they own together, and he gets involved with this single mom and her child through this custody battle that's going on, while also being haunted. So Bag of Bones has everything, and although it's very long, I also feel like Bag of Bones would be one of those books that I'd recommend to someone that wanted to get into Stephen King. If they're a reader, I would definitely suggest Bag of Bones because of the length. And it's not one of those books that it's like disgusting and, you know, shock and things. I mean, King isn't really known for those things either. So I think that's probably why when he does go a little extreme, everyone's like, what? I had a tail under my armpit. With the Millennium, we got a book that also I feel like no one ever just glows about. Like, no one ever talks about this book and is, I don't know, praising it like they do, like, Night Shift or whatever. And that's Everything's Eventual, which at this moment stands as my favorite Stephen King collection. Everything's Eventual has a bunch of different stories in it. It has a story in there that sticks with me to this day called LT's Theory of Pets. I think it's one of King's best short stories that he's ever written. There is a Dark Tower short story in there, which I've only read the first Dark Tower. I wasn't a very big fan of it the first time I read it. So my Stephen King points just went down. But Everything's Eventual is... I'm sorry. He's just looking at me so pitifully. Oh, he doesn't understand. I feel so bad. But I'm trying to help. So, Everything's Eventual. Does it have 14 stories or 13? I read somewhere that Stephen King had a fear of the number 13. So, I kind of don't think that there are 13 stories. I think there are 14. I'm not sure. I'll check. But either way, there are a ton of stories in here that the good outweigh the bad. Because, like, in my mind right now, the only story I can think of that wasn't bad, but wasn't what it could have been for me, was the Dark Tower story. I forget what it's called. It's been so long since I read this book. But I know that there, like, 1408 is in this book. Riding the Bullet. I love Riding the Bullet. Horrible movie made after this story. But Riding the Bullet is amazing. I think the first story in the book, I think it's The Man in Black. Amazing story. There's one about this host. Oh, what is that name? I think it's a weird name. But it's about, like, this dinner host and an umbrella, and it's awesome. And those are just the ones I can think of right off the top of my head. I really liked Everything's Eventual, and I think that it should have more praise going toward it because, in my opinion, it's way better than Night Shift. And Night Shift is my second favorite, so take that as you will. And finally, the last decade, the one we just left. I don't know what we ever decided to call that decade, but the 2010s? I don't know, I live under a rock. The last 10 years have provided us with a lot of King books that sort of walked away from the horror genre a little, like the Mr. Mercedes books, and I think The Outsider is also like a crime fiction book instead. A lot of the stories in Bazaar of a Bad Dream, I think that's what the book is called. A lot of them weren't really straight horror either. So King kind of took a step back a few times this last decade. But there is one book that he wrote couple of years ago that is horror, and I feel like it's one of his modern classics because this is a book that I would love to see into a movie. It proved at the time, because I'm pretty sure this book came right after or during the Mr. Mercedes trilogy books. So it kind of proved that King can still write scary when he wants to. And that book is Revival. It is about this boy who in the beginning is a child, and he befriends the new town preacher. And this preacher is borderline obsessed with like electricity and things. He can make magic things happen with like batteries and stuff. And in the beginning of the book, his wife and son are in a car accident, and he loses his faith. And it drives him into an almost Frankenstein type of journey, but we mostly follow the young boy as he grows up over the years and manages to keep contact with the preacher in different parts of his life. Now, I have yet to read anything of Lovecraft, but I have heard a lot of people say that the ending is very Lovecraftian. So, I'm going to take their word for it. I really did like the story, and I think it's definitely unique. And it just goes on to prove that King can still write one heck of a horror book, no matter how old he is, and no matter how many times he may go to another genre, he can still write a horror book. I guess this means this is the end of the video. Yes. This is the end of the video. So those were my favorite Stephen King books over the last few decades. I am looking forward to what King is going to do within the next 10 years. And obviously, in the comments, share what your King books are for each decade. Which ones stand out to you the most? Because I'd love to hear them. I mean, you just sat through probably like 10-15 minutes of me rambling about the ones I like, so let me hear about the ones you like. Salem wants to know too. Now make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Give this video a big thumbs up. All of my social media and links to my books and many other things are in the description box down below. You have a claw in my shoulder. Thank you. And yeah, thanks guys. And kisses, my darlings.